Hey everybody, welcome to the Lead Stories podcast. And I've just got that bit wrong, haven't I?
No, that was right.
No, it hasn't. That's all right. I was waiting for you and I thought, no, I'm waiting too early. Right, I'm going to do that all over again. Hey everybody, welcome to the Lead Stories podcast, where we believe that everyone has influence.
And when you are intentional with your influence, then you are a leader. We're so glad that you're with us. I'm Pastor Steph.
And I'm Joe Saxton, having a very good day, apparently.
Yeah.
I'm remembering everything, all the things.
What Joe really likes is that sometimes I put your bloopers on at the front.
Oh, do you?
Every once in a while.
Because
they're so funny.
I feel like my life is one blooper, so I'm good with that.
Well, we've got some friends with us today.
Friends, today we are global.
We are global.
We're not just local. We are not just national. We are global.
Global.
Yes. Where a few weeks ago, or a little while ago, I was in Australia, and one of the friends I did not get to meet because he was sick. I'm not angry at that, Graham. I have forgiven you. Honestly, I'm not just saying this on a podcast for everybody's benefit. One of the friends that I didn't get to see is someone we want to bring to you today, alongside one of his colleagues and our new friend. And we're going to be getting them to share lots of their wisdom and their knowledge with us. I'm very excited. And so today we have Reverend Dr. Graham Joseph Hill and Reverend Dr. Grace Ji-Sun Kim. Are you there, friends?
Yes, we are. Thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast.
Thanks so much for having us here.
Well, this is exciting. This is definitely the most time zones that we have recorded a podcast in. And Graham is living life ahead of us. Graham's living life ahead of us.
He's in the future.
That's right. I'm living far in the future, at least 12 hours in the future.
That's amazing. Well, we're so glad that you're here with us. And we love to profile leaders and just hear from them the kind of work that they're doing. We just believe that we can grow when we listen to people who are different than us and people who have different contexts than us. And I know that that's a passion for both of you as well. So we're excited to have you on to talk about your work, but also just because of who you are and the leadership that you have in different spaces. So we're so grateful. And I, for one, am just excited about two Reverend doctors on this podcast right now. I might explode.
I feel already that my brain cells are just being refined.
They're being stretched.
Being
stretched. We're kind of
you
joking.
guys are too
we're
nice.
Also not. We're just actually, we're in awe. We're so grateful
awesome,
for you.
Actually. Just for the sake of our listeners, it would be great if each of you could tell us a bit of who you are, what you do, where you're based. So Grace, if we could start with you. Tell us who you are, where you're based, some of the things that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Again, I just wanted to express my gratitude to both Stephanie and Joe to invite us. This is a great pleasure. So I presently live in Pennsylvania, but I teach in Richmond, Indiana at the Earlham School of Religion. I'm an associate professor of theology. I was born in Korea. I grew up in Canada, and now I'm here in the U.S. teaching and writing books. And it was a pleasure to write with Reverend Dr. Graham Joseph Hill.
Oh, we're so grateful that you made all of those journeys, and God brought you to us here in the United States. We're so grateful. Awesome. How about you, Graham?
Thank you.
Yes, so I'm an Australian and I'm living in Sydney. I teach at Stirling Theological College, which is part of the University of Divinity. My particular area of interest is in researching and writing about what God is doing globally, and thinking about what does that mean for the church's discipleship and mission and faith and prayer and those sorts of areas. So I'm writing books as well, and it was a wonderful opportunity to write with Grace recently with our new book.
Yeah, we're excited to talk about the book. Could you share just a little bit more about the Global Church Project? We've actually referenced that a few times on the podcast and encouraged people to head there. So why don't you just give us the little pitch of what that's about so that we can get more people heading over to see the writing and the work that you've done?
Yeah, so the website is theglobalchurchproject.com. And on that website, we interview hundreds, something like 350 Christian leaders from Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, Caribbean, across Oceania, Indigenous and First Nations. So people from all over the world. And what we're wanting to do is listen to what God is doing globally and what we can learn from what God is doing globally for renewing our mission and revitalizing our churches.
I just think that's so powerful. As a pastor, just recognizing that if we get too myopic, well, we're often too myopic because of what we see in our purview. And so the way that you've opened up the knowledge of what God's doing in other church leaders and ministry leaders around the world is so helpful for any one of us to be able to take into our context, because nearly all of us are in more globalized contexts now, especially for people like me in an urban center. So thanks for doing that work, Graham.
Yeah, thank you.
Graham, and Grace and Graham, I'm going to ask you a bit about the book in a second, but one, I'm curious, Graham, for you in your experience, and Grace, I'm going to ask you a similar question a little while along those lines. What was the most humbling thing that you've seen, or the biggest challenge as you've explored the church in different cultures?
Well, probably the biggest challenge for me was recognizing my own sin, my own superiority and racism, and even the way in which my understanding of the church and its mission and the way that we should do theology was really shaped largely by my own, white, male, Euro-American, Western-centeredness, to use a couple of big terms.
Yeah.
And so as I interview people from all over the world and I listen to other voices, I was constantly humbled by the Spirit and recognizing my own need to repent and to change and to pay attention to voices that are often not listened to and heard. So probably the most humbling thing for me was just hearing the voice of the Spirit through so many voices all over the globe, and the voice of the Spirit reminding me of my own need to repent, to change, to be humble, to be attentive to others.
That's powerful.
That's powerful. Wonderful. Now, Grace, not quite the same question for you, but I was just struck by even you saying your own personal journey, as in being born in Korea, living in Canada, and now the US. And I'm not sure where your faith began on that journey, but in three very different contexts, what are some of the things that have been a stretch or a challenge or even an inspiration to you as you reflect on faith?
Okay, thank you for that question. So I was born in Korea, and I was only 5 when I left. Mm-hmm. So in Korea, none of our family, either my mother's side or my father's side, attended church or were Christians. Mm-hmm. Once we immigrated, church is usually a lively part of an immigrant family, whether you're Korean, Chinese, or other different ethnicities. It's a place to gather, to meet friends, to find job, to eat Korean food or your ethnic food. So that's how we began going to church. My sister and I started earlier, and as children, we were about 7. And then we attended church, and then our parents went. And since then, it's always been a very important part of my life. Growing up in a Korean Presbyterian church, very, very conservative. I think if you ever meet a liberal Korean church, it'll be still very conservative. So it's very difficult. It was very difficult to grow up in a very conservative Korean Presbyterian church. So earlier when you're asking Graham about some of the challenges, I think part of my challenge growing up in the church is the sexism that I was confronted constantly. So it's very, very difficult growing up when you're constantly told, male, everything is male, God is male, everyone, the pastor has to be male, the leaders are male, only the men can kind of lead the church and speak for the church and do things important in the church. So that was a very difficult thing for me as a child growing up and recognizing that early. And that was one of the reasons why I kind of decided to go to seminary. I thought this is strange. How can only the men be allowed to speak and be the leaders in the church, be ministers in the church? So that was one of the reasons that I actually started seminary. The church has been a very important part of my life. I got ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA. I used to work at a church for a long time until recently, but still today I'm doing a lot of preaching and pulpit supply wherever I am.
That's great.
Wonderful. Thank you, Grace, for sharing just the texture of your journey. And part of the reason I asked was in the light of your book that you guys wrote together, and I note here that Outreach Magazine has named your book their 2019 resource for the year.
Yay!
Category. And the book is called Healing Our Broken Humanity, Practices for Revitalizing the Church and Renewing the World. What made you do this book together? All of us on this interview are authors, and I have to say the times I've written with other people have been some of my least fun times.
It's challenging. It's challenging.
I think there are easier ways to do things. I find
it's easier said than done. Because before Graham speaks, I just want to share when I was doing my PhD program, my director, thesis directors told me that he co-wrote a book with his wife. And I said, oh my God, I was so young. I didn't know anything about publishing. I said, that is fantastic. I said, what a great thing for you to do. And he said, we're still lucky to be still married to each other. Because he said there's so much negotiations happening. But, this one actually was such a pleasant journey. And I think it has all to do with Graham, because we only met once before we started the book. He reached out. He was doing this international travel, interviewing tons of people in the US and in Europe. So he reached out to me and we met in New Jersey. I was doing something in Princeton at the time. And so we ended up meeting there. And the interview was an hour, maybe, Graham. And we just chit-chatted for a few minutes, or I don't know how much. We didn't spend a whole lot of time. But then we stayed in touch and we thought we should do a book together. We thought it'd be great, kind of a global kind of perspective on an idea and concept. So right from the beginning, actually, it was a very, very pleasant journey. And I think I owe it all to Graham. So I really thank Graham for this opportunity to co-write. I've written several books before this one. I co-wrote several books, but this was a really pleasant journey. So thank you.
Yeah, and we thought that the book would have a lot more richness and depth, and there would be something special about a book being written together by two people from very different nations, ethnic backgrounds, a man and a woman. So we bring different things to the table, and writing together writing across difference makes it just a much richer book that speaks more profoundly, I think, to the issues and relates to a lot more people. I think one of the reasons why Grace and I write so well together is that we kind of defer to each other, or we preference one another. So writing together is a constant act of compromise and of honouring and respecting the other person. And one of the reasons why I think we work really well together is because we just really honour each other, respect each other deeply, defer to each other, want to honour each other's perspectives in every way we can. And when you start from that point and you're really listening to each other, it makes the writing journey a lot easier.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was very easy. And, the different time zone actually worked well because Graham's a hard worker. So if I send him something before I go to bed, when I wake up, he already responded and another chapter's written. So it was great. So I didn't have to wait all day long for any response. I would just send it, go to bed, and then it was there in the morning.
That's so funny. I never would have thought about that. I just would have thought, man, how challenging to be in different time zones, but it actually makes a lot of sense.
Well, it won't work with everybody, but it certainly worked with Graham, so it was good.
It's quite a powerful witness that the title itself, Healing Our Broken Humanity, and inviting people to discover and engage these practices, is something that you kind of embodied in your writing as well. Do you know what I mean? In terms of,
yes,
you could have done it. You could have done your own thing, could have been separate. But actually, it sounds like even the writing itself modeled what the book was about and modeled what the things that you were going after. You talk about a number of practices that individuals and communities can take on to change themselves in society. And I just, even reflecting on what these practices are, I'm struck by how relevant they are. They talk about reimagining church, renew lament, repent together, relinquish power, restore justice, reactivate hospitality, reinforce agency, reconcile relationships, and recover life together. I mean, basically everybody, you need to just go and buy the book.
Yeah,
and we're not going to get you or anything like that, because seriously. However, what I am going to ask each of you is, I don't know whether it's a favorite one, but are there particular practices that you wrote about that stand out for you? And I'd love to hear why, the heartbeat behind why a particular practice stood out for you. Grace, why don't you go first?
Oh, okay. You know, actually, I really liked each of these chapters, and it was interesting. We started each one with R, and we thought, we'll have the letter R in our title. We were trying to work out with the alliteration. But anyway, that didn't make it into the title, but we wanted to stick with the R so people can remember it very well. There's really nothing that sticks out that I like, this is the most important thing. But there were several chapters I really enjoyed working with Graham on. And I can't remember whose idea it was to include these topics. But for example, when we came to talking about relinquishing power and reinforcing agency, these are two things I struggle a lot with. So earlier I said about, I experienced a lot of sexism in the church. Later on, I recognized I experienced so much racism in the church. And these two things I continue to experience. I'm sure, Joe, you may experience it, and Stephanie, you as a woman will experience the racism and the sexism. So these two things are things I continually struggle with my own denomination, with the faith community, with the academic community, the academy that I deal with. These are ongoing issues. It's not going away. So it was interesting to write with the white male, and Graham brought in so much perspective, and he, earlier he talked about repentance. He talked about some of his struggles in the church. And that comes through in our chapter, because I thought, how am I going to deal with relinquishing power when it's really the white male that holds the most power in our society, in our global world? It's the white male. How are we going to talk about this? And Graham was so good. He was so gracious. And you have to read the chapter to really get to the point. So I hope those who buy the book will maybe start with the relinquishing power section, because he's able to relinquish it. He understands his power. He understands where he situates himself in society. So that was so heartwarming for me to kind of engage in that dialogue and write the chapter together. I don't know if I actually ever shared that with Graham, because we've done several interviews, and I don't know if we ever got into that. But I really appreciated, because that's what I want to hear from a white male. But to get that from a co-writer was so empowering to me. And even when he talked about reinforcing agency and how he wants to reinforce agency to those who don't have voice. And for me, as a woman of color, as a Korean American woman, always feeling that I don't have the agency in a room or in a situation or in a community, and to co-write this and sharing it and writing it from our different perspectives, sharing our own experiences, because in all of these chapters, we do bring in our own experience in our own context, which is very globalized, me from the Korean, Canadian, American, and Graham from the Australian perspective. I really enjoyed it. So, those two chapters kind of stand out. And Graham, I can go on and on. But anyway, one more would be hospitality. How we reactivate hospitality. I enjoyed talking about that and writing about it, because Graham has his own perspective, and I, from an Asian perspective, have a different one. So that was really enjoyable to write about. And I go back and reference it all the time in my talks, in my classroom. So that was really fun. And I would go on, but I'll leave it to my co-author, and then I could join in after him. So Graham, go ahead.
I think probably one of the topics that I really enjoyed looking at was the one around relishing diversity. We are living in an age, I think, where there's a lot of antagonism and hostility and fear of others. And politicians and others are playing to that fear around undocumented migrants, around the ethnic or religious or political other. And we're called to have a new kind of imagination, to be a people who relish diversity, and don't relish diversity because of pragmatic reasons. Sometimes I think actually diversity as a topic has been hijacked by the pragmatists, but we relish diversity because of a biblical imagination.
Right.
Absolutely.
We know that God has brought us together as men and women of various political persuasions, ethnicities, cultural and linguistic backgrounds, right across the spectrum, has brought us together to be this fellowship of difference, a new people who love each other and honour each other, who commit to welcoming and fostering and relishing diversity across race, theology, politic, physical difference, gender, and reshaping our whole life together so we can witness to the world about what it means to be this new, diverse, multi-ethnic people.
I love that. And we have to just say we love the alliterations. So
Yeah,
we're all on this podcast, and I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure our listeners giggled when you said that, Grace.
Okay, that's good because I think it was Graham's idea to do the alliteration.
I actually
So
love it.
It worked out well that we were able to find all these R's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually
You
one of
can
the
tell that I'm a Baptist preacher when every topic starts with the same letter.
Yeah, you know that's true. It's so good. I love
You're
it.
a good Baptist preacher. Thank you, Graham.
Well, I love the way that you two can affirm each other and the partnership in the process. So we're just grateful for that. Now that the book has been out and you know that there's people who have engaged with the subject matter, and then, I mean, I think it's really intentional, I'm sure, that you use the word practices. You want people to put these things into practice. I'd love to hear just some reactions that you've had, the ways you've heard from other people, what it's been like for them to try to step into the R words, to step into these things, and what stuck out to them, and just any stories from hearing from the readers.
Yeah, sure. So I know readers have reached out, and I've spoken in various places, particularly churches, and I'll be doing one next month too at Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Great.
So many of them request a certain chapter because they're having a very difficult time practicing something. So I will present on whatever the topic is. And then some places they ask, can you just choose a topic? Because we're kind of interested in all of them. And in a lot of places, people are actually very interested in chapter 2, which is the Renew Lament. That was a chapter I actually had a hard time writing. I don't know about Graham, but for me that was hard because in my tradition, the Presbyterian tradition, we rarely talk about lament. We don't lament, and I myself have never really practiced lamenting. So it was kind of forced upon me. I got to do this now for the book. I got to practice this. What does this mean? So, sometimes you're kind of forced to do it because you're going to write on it, or you have a talk that's coming up, so you have to do all this research. So that was kind of put upon me for this one. I think it was Graham's idea to do the lament. I can't remember now. Once it's done, my memory fades. But this is a topic that so many churches are now excited about because they realize, particularly in the U.S., I think Australia might be a little different, or where we may be in the same wavelength, but particularly here in the U.S., I feel we need to lament. Because we haven't been lamenting, and there's a lot of things to lament about in the U.S. in our political scene, and it's not getting any better any day soon. There's a lot of problems in our churches and our faith communities. Just the other day, I remember in the news a woman who's running for some political position, and she says she wants to make her city all white again. Now she has gone off, and she's not going to run anymore. I can't remember her name, and I don't want to remember her name, but we have people like that even today in 2019, not wanting to kind of embrace and love one another, but sinning against one another and committing crimes against each other. So there is a lot to lament. And in our chapter, we offer steps on how to lament. We offer biblical references on why we need to lament and why the church needs to lament. I preach in different denominations. I don't just preach in the Presbyterian Church. And churches aren't doing the corporate lamenting. So I think there's a great need for churches who want to learn how to lament and practice the lament, either on a Sunday morning in their worship, or during the week, or at special times. A really deep need to lament.
That's powerful. It really is.
Powerful stuff. Graham,
Yeah, one of the practices that I've had a lot of conversations around is relinquishing power.
Yeah.
So I often meet with groups of pastors, for instance, and most of the time they are groups of men. Very often white men are overrepresented in pastoral ministry as well. So not only are males overrepresented, but white males are. And very often when I'm meeting with groups of pastors, and a large percentage of them are white men like myself, I'll explore, what does it mean to relinquish power? What does it mean for us to give up our status, our privilege, our power for the sake of others? So, for instance, one of the exercises that I'll do with the pastors is get them to reflect on ways in which they can encourage conference and panel organisers to make sure that there's a strong representation of women and people from a wide range of ethnic and racial backgrounds presenting at the conferences, being present on the panels.
Yeah.
And then I encourage the men to think about, what does it mean for us as men to actually give up our positions, to relinquish our power, to step aside from opportunities that we might be able to make the most of, but we're choosing to let them go. And then I get them to explore, and sometimes there's a bit of resistance around that, but once men start to get it, they get quite excited about it. And I encourage them to think a lot about the kind of power of Christ that is present in self-emptying. So there's power in relinquishment and in self-emptying and giving away power. When we give away power, we discover a new kind of power. It's the power of love, the power of the Spirit, the power of grace, the power of making yourself nothing for the sake of others.
Wow.
And so I've done this exercise a lot with men, particularly men in ministry, and I've discovered a lot of men, sometimes have difficulty with it at first, but once they catch on and it begins to burn in their spirit and in their heart, it can really transform their lives and their ministries.
That's so powerful.
Yes.
So powerful. I'm intrigued, Graham. As like you said, you gave us a little insight there. I felt like we were a fly in the room of one of your workshops.
Yeah,
which is frankly brilliant and exactly what I'd like to do. You said that sometimes there's a little bit of pushback or people wrestled with it a bit. Now that people have begun to engage with it, have you seen conference lineups change in the context where you've discussed these things with people? Have people got to that step yet?
Yeah, I'm slow. Well, it's a slow change. I'll tell a good news story, for instance. I know, Joe, that you've recently been here in Australia and spoke at the New South Wales Baptist leadership gathering. For quite a number of years, it felt like many years for me, I was provoking and prodding and challenging our leaders to think about a new kind of lineup of presenters at our conferences and on our panels, because what really disturbed me as an Australian Baptist was that most of the conferences I went to, the conference speakers and the panels were all full of people who looked like me, white, middle-aged men. And for many, many years, I challenged that. I encouraged them to rethink that. And there was a while there when I thought, I don't know whether change is ever going to happen. And then in the last few years, it's been so exciting to see the change begin to happen. So about 2 years ago, we ran a major conference where we gathered Baptists from all over the country, and the organisers made sure that something like 75% of the presenters were female and of a non-Anglo background, so women of colour. And then that commitment has just continued in the panels and the conferences. And to me, I'm surprised, I'm delighted, I'm thrilled that the change is happening. It hasn't happened fast enough, but it's finally happening, which has been exciting for me to see.
Wonderful.
I love it.
I love it when it's more than 1 year as well. You know, I think
Yeah, exactly.
for me, a sign of change is when, like, otherwise something happens in the culture and people are like, oh, I must do something. And they do it for 1 year and then it reverts back.
Yeah.
The fact that you're seeing it more than 1 year is a sign of a culture shift.
Yeah, that people are starting to think that we can't go back to what we were doing before. We can't see it any other way going forward.
But that's a good news. But then I just saw something in Tennessee. There's a lineup next month called the lecture series called The Christian Women.
Oh,
And they
yeah.
have four. Yeah, did you see that? The four white men and one black man talking about the Christian woman.
Oh.
That is still going on. Their topic is as a faithful wife, as a loving mother, as a Bible class teacher, and on and on. So you got 5 men still talking about what the Christian woman's supposed to be. So anyway, that thanks for sharing the good news, but still we've got some lot of work to do still here in the U.S.
I do remember seeing that
yes.
that thing and thinking, I need to close my laptop and leave the room.
Yeah.
I can name the church, but I'll just name it nameless. Yeah.
Yes, I agree that it's good that it happens more than once, because quite a number of studies have been done that show that often when a good deed or something is done that is just on one occasion, it can sometimes actually entrench the problem, not help the problem, particularly if people do something like, for instance, invite a whole range of women of colour to speak at a conference. Then what they do is they pat themselves on the back. They say, see, we're not sexist, we're not racist, we invite everybody. And then they congratulate themselves and they don't actually dig deeply into the root of the problem or seek systematic change.
Yep.
And then actually the problem can get deeper and more entrenched as a result of that one good act. And so this is why I agree with you, Joe. It's important that we do something. We're happy that some change is happening, but we recognise that the problem is systemic. It's a deep issue, and it's going to take a long time to solve. And change. We got ourselves into this situation over a very long period of time, and change is going to take a long period of time as well. So we need to continue the good work.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I'd like to not quite pivot, but shift the conversation slightly as we talk, and I'd love to hear just some of your thoughts that you would love to share with our audience. Our audience are leaders. A number of them are leaders in churches, and others in the academy, but many are people of faith or people on a faith journey who are living into their leadership in business, in the local community, things like that. And for all of whom the things that you're talking about are incredibly relevant and incredibly important as we seek to see our world changed and as we seek to see human flourishing. I'm almost not quite sure what to ask, because part of me is like, what would you like to say to people? But I don't. I guess maybe that is the question. Maybe I should just keep it simple and not try and be clever. So I'll start with Grace. Grace, when you look at your landscape and you look at I know that you're speaking to congregations, you're speaking to leaders within the academy. What would you love them to hear as leaders as they engage with the challenges and the opportunities of their day? What would you want to say to them today?
I want to encourage people, and there are faithful leaders who are putting these practices and they're living it out. But I think the majority of us have a hard time doing it. And so even, we have these 9 practices for healing our broken humanity. They're not easy. And I think that's what human beings are. We try, we may fail, but as leaders, we want to try harder and harder. So, these are not easy things, but I think because it's difficult, we don't just kind of give up and say, hey, it's too hard and I don't need to do this. I think if we want to be faithful leaders in the church and be the leaders in the academy, we still try our best. And at the end of the day, for me, I always resort to the Holy Spirit or to the Spirit. I call it Spirit. The publishers always push me and they say, write the word holy. But that's another whole different conversation that we could have another day. But I think, these are really hard. So we have chapters about reimagining church, repenting together and restoring justice and reconciling relationships. These are all difficult. And so for me, and for those who struggle to kind of live out the commandment that God has given us to love one another and to love God, I think we really have to cry out to the Spirit. And I think that's part of the book too. We say, come Spirit, come, renew us and fill us so that we can try to live it out, live the commandment that God has given us, so that we can be the faithful leaders, and that, what we do in our lives will be catchy, and people will want to see what it is that we're doing. What is it that's so exciting that other people will want to do it? So, this is not an easy journey, and I have a hard time with this journey. So I hope that people will kind of be part and engage in the journey. And so that's what I want to share.
Thank you, Grace. And Grace, I would love to ask one more question, if I may, of you.
Yes.
We go and that I know that a number of our listeners will have identified with your journey, your personal journey, in terms of wrestling with sexism and racism as they've sought to be faithful to their calling, and who and don't often get the chance to hear an Asian American woman share of how she got there, or how she processed the pain, how she carried the cost, and would love to hear an encouragement to keep going. What would you say to those women who share something of your journey in whatever leadership space as they seek to be faithful to their call?
Yeah, that it is not easy. So many times I actually wanted to give up. So in my seminary studies, I said, nobody seems to understand my struggle. So I wanted to give up then. In my PhD studies, and I write about it and I blog about some of these things too. In my PhD studies, I had so much struggle from classmates, from the church, from family, all telling me to give it up. So it's hard to keep going when your culture and the faith community says you shouldn't be doing this, that I should be married. I was married, but then have children and do other womanly things. That wasn't that long ago. I think that was only 20 years ago. I can't imagine 20 years ago people were doing that to me. And when I think about it, I know people are still doing that to other women and women of color. So there were a lot of obstacles, a lot of difficulties, a lot of times I wanted to give up. And to those people who are struggling, I would say to keep doing it, to keep going. There are other people that are struggling, and we are all part of the community. There are ways to survive. We need each other to fight the systemic racism and the sexism that pervades our society and in our churches and in the academy. So I really want other women, particularly women of color, to kind of come together and be part of the community. I'm part of other communities, and we need to encourage, to pray for one another, to stand by one another. And I know there's a lot of backstabbing going on to push people down. And that's what I really like about Graham, because Graham is all about uplifting and lifting people up. We need to do that more. And so part of this writing together and the book, that's what we want to do, to kind of encourage that it is not easy to fight racism when it's in your face. It's been in my face all my life. I always ask my dad, I wish we never immigrated. And he keeps telling me, oh, you don't want to have growing up in Korea. No, I wish I grew up with people that are my kind and my community. in my own country, but that wasn't my choice. And it's, life, people are always talking about immigrants, go back. It's not easy. You can't just go back to a place that is not your community or your faith anymore. There's so many things that are happening. It's not a one-dimensional thing. There's multidimensional. There's so many things going on. That's why I wish people would stop saying go back to your country. Our country, my Korea is not the same as what when I left in the 70s. And for those who leave for different reasons, people, Korea, it was a socioeconomic reasons. That's why people left. People leave their countries for political reasons, for religious reasons, for climate change reasons. There's so many reasons. So we have to be careful what we say to one another, and how we, and particularly in the US, building that wall. Why do we need a wall when there is a wall? Why do we need a bigger wall? There's something strange happening in our world. So I just want to say to those who are struggling and feeling so alone, that we need each other, and we need to reach out to people. People reach out to me too. And, I really want to encourage people. This faith journey is not easy. So many people, when I speak, particularly in seminaries, when I speak, the women students will always say, why didn't you leave? That's one of the questions I get over and over again. Why didn't I leave? Because I talk about the horribleness, the sinfulness of our churches. And I said, you know what? If I left the church, I can't critique the church because I'm outside the church. I have to still critique it being part of the church. And I still love the church. I have my faith. It's not easy for me to leave that and say, I'm going to leave. Although I know many people who have left the church. I know many women who have left the church. They'll never go back to that church or to the church community. And I understand that. But for me, then I can't fight the sexism that exists, and I can't fight the racism that exists in the church. And I still love the church. So that's why I stay in the church.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So good.
That's so powerful.
So Graham, when you think about the similar question, just these folks who are leading in these spaces, just like Grace spoke to, many people who feel discouraged, and then others who I think are ready to step in and want to do some things, want to maybe step into that, these practices that you're talking about. What's encouragement or challenge would you want to offer to them?
Yeah, I think I'd say to leaders that humility is at the heart of all Christian leadership. So Jesus instituted a revolution of humility into the world. Without getting too technical, if you look at the Greco-Roman world and all of the ancient sources, humility was not a prized virtue in the ancient world.
Yeah.
But Jesus, and sometimes we forget this, it was actually the life and death of Jesus that put humility front and center of what we consider to be the most noble virtues today.
Wow.
And all true Christian leadership is shaped around humility and service, modeled after the image of Jesus Christ. The early church reflected not only on the way in which Jesus demonstrated humility and service, but what really turned their world upside down was the crucified Christ. What kind of God is crucified? It makes no sense at all. And in fact, Jesus' crucifixion upends notions of greatness.
Wow.
What his crucifixion shows us is that greatness is expressed in humility, in choosing to lower oneself for the sake of others, in choosing to make yourself nothing so that others can be something and their lives can be enriched. So when I talk to leaders, we're living in an age of self-promotion, branding, narcissism, domination of others. As Christian leaders, whether it be in church life or in the secular world, wherever we might be, to remember that right at the heart of Christian ministry and leadership is humility and service, and to put that back front and center.
That's so powerful. I had not thought about what you said about the ancient world. That is really a really important reframe about the importance of Jesus as that model. So I just think, the idea that Jesus modeled something, but then also is like Grace, like you said, accessible to us through the Spirit is such a powerful thing to remember as we step into a really difficult time, and we continue to take. This has been for many people, their whole life has been a time of struggle and anxiety and strife and all these things. But this has been a season for many people where it's harder and harder to ignore these practices and the necessities of them because of the world around us. And so I just think we're so grateful for both of your work and for the investment that you put not only into these, but please check out the other works that these guys have written. We could probably talk to you about this all day, but thank you so much for your time and investment.
So appreciate it.
Just coming to the podcast, but also all the time that it represents that you spent coming before so many groups of people and bringing up these important topics. We're so grateful for you guys.
Well, thank you so much. This was a great time to share and to explore and to be speaking with my co-author too. So thank you so much for having us.
Thanks so much for having us. It's been a wonderful privilege to be able to write with Grace and to be able to have these kinds of conversations and to reflect together on how God is renewing the church and transforming the world.
Yeah, wonderful.
Well, you both have mentioned, we mentioned the book. Graham, you mentioned the Global Church Project. Can both of you just share how people can either follow you or find you online? I know there'll be people who are interested in doing that, and then we'll put it in the show notes.
Okay, sure. I think you're located in Minnesota, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So actually, for those who live in Minnesota, I'll be speaking at the Connect Summit. I think it's November or October this year. So that, they can find me there. But all my social media is Grace G. San Kim. So people can find me on my website. There's an email. People can reach out to me, and people have, and they continue to ask and engage, which is so exciting for me because, when you finish a book, it's not really the end of the book because people ask certain questions. You go, oh, maybe I should answer that in the next book. So, Graham and I are not finished. So hopefully you'll hear more from us. But I would love for people to meet me in Minnesota at the Connect Summit. It's a multi-denominational event.
Fantastic.
And people can find me online and follow me on social media, on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook.
Great.
And
we'll put that in the show notes.
Graham? Yeah.
Yeah, one way to find me is through theglobalchurchproject.com. And all of my resources and books and things are there, so theglobalchurchproject.com. The other way is to search up for me, Graham Joseph Hill, on social media, and I'd love to connect with you on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. I love connecting with people, and social media just makes it so easy these days.
Yeah, so
Graham and I love people, so we love to meet and connect with people, and we hope to meet you in person one day too.
Yes,
Right, that'd be wonderful.
Glad to hear you're coming our way. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you for your time, and and just thank you for leading us and teaching us and investing in us and our audience.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for all the work you're doing. This is great. Thank you. You guys are a much needed voice. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Lead Stories podcast, a production of Lead Stories Media. You can support and connect with Joe and Steph by becoming a part of Lead Stories community. Find out more at leadstoriesmedia.com/community. We hope that you have been challenged and encouraged by this podcast. Please subscribe and be sure to tune in next week.